Hello, Math 10C. So we are going to start and look at our Chapter 1 booklets. Okay, we're going to start on 1.1 and just go in order 1.2, 1.3, so on and so forth. Something to note about this unit, we're not going to focus on 1.2. You are totally welcome to look at that in the textbook. It's just a more of an exploratory chapter, and it's not something that's totally mandatory in this course. So what's going to happen in these booklets is you're going to have to print these off, and you're going to have to follow through and take your own notes while you watch. Okay, so you're welcome to pause the video at certain points. You can rewind. That's the best part about this. It's kind of like a lesson where you take notes, but you have to, but you have the ability to pause and walk away from it and come back to it and take brain breaks or come and ask questions in the middle of the seminar for certain things you don't understand. This is 10% of your grade, so make sure you are following along nicely and taking those notes as well. Of course, you can ask questions, no problem about it, but please go through the video before you come in to ask a question specifically for something like this, okay? Something to note, after every 1.1, you are going to be expected to go to your AFLs, that's on your Moodle page, and do those practice problems. Give them a try. They're going to be very closely tied to what you see here. Don't focus just on this. This is going to be very useful for you to go through in this course, but please use the other videos provided. They might show you a different method than I do, so on and so forth. Remember, we do have a formula sheet. This can be found on your home Moodle page for Math 10C. We are going to be learning all about this and this in this chapter, okay? So we're already eating up a big chunk of our lesson or our data booklet just in this chapter. Now, the first thing we're going to talk about is imperial units. Now, we just need to know references for the first 1.1. Now, what is a reference? A reference is something where we can imagine what an inch is, okay? So someone who has never heard of an inch, you'd have to be able to explain it to them what an inch is, okay? So an inch is about a thumb length. So if you can imagine from here to here, that's about an inch. So when we talk about certain things, maybe the lengthwise of my calculator here, we wouldn't talk about it in feet because 1 foot is already larger than this calculator. We would talk about it probably in inches, and you could imagine that, right? This is about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-ish. This is around 10 inches long, okay? And you can imagine it being 10 thumb lengths long. Now we go into foot, which is measured in FT dot, okay? And you guys know hopefully what a foot length is. A foot length is about the size of an adult man's foot, okay? Usually more of like a 6-foot guy. They usually have 12-inch feet. And that's a conversion there. 1 foot equals 12 inch. And you can find that over here. So these are called imperial units, okay? Imperial units is something that we use in Canada, okay? Metric units, okay? Metric units are something that is more used, I would say, in the States, okay? They talk more about like centimeters and meters. In the States, okay, in the United States, they'll talk about how tall someone is based in centimeters, which is kind of strange to us Canadians because we imagine it in foot and inches. So Mr. Scaber, I'm 5'10", okay, on a really good day, I'm 5'11". What does that mean? That means I'm 5 feet 11 inches, okay? So that's a foot length. That's something we're gonna probably measure a basketball net in. That's tall enough, and a basketball net is 10 feet long. We wouldn't wanna say it is 120 inches long. That just doesn't make any sense to our brains. We can better imagine 10 adult feet lined up along each other. A yard is an arm span, okay? So a yard is about if you put your arms out like this is about a yard. Now it's gonna depend based on how tall or short you are. Some people have really long arm spans. For me, I actually have extremely long arms compared to the height of my body. Okay, so your arm span is actually supposed to be about as tall as you are this way. Okay, so this way is supposed to equal this way. For me, as I said, I'm about 5'10". My wingspan is actually roughly about 6'1". Okay, so I kind of have monkey arms. Now a mile, that's about how far it takes for you to walk a 20-meter distance, or in 20 minutes, sorry. Okay, a mile is a little bit longer than a kilometer. Okay, so 1 mile equals roughly 1.6 kilometers. So miles is something the United States will use, whereas we use our kilometers. Okay, millimeters, about the thickness of a dime. Okay, another way to think about it, it could be the thickness of like a doll pencil. Okay, so actually this is a better one here. So that's about as thick as a millimeter, so super small. You're gonna only be using really, really tiny measurements, or like measuring like the thickness of, or maybe the length of this thing. You could argue that you would measure it in millimeters. Centimeters is still a little smaller, but it's the width of the smallest fingernail. So pretty much your pinky. Okay, so it's about from here to here of your fingernail. Remember, the thumb is an inch. Now your pinky fingernail is a centimeter. A meter is the length of a running stride. So pretty much when you're running, if you ever start to run, or maybe you do run track, 100-meter sprint, someone who's kind of the average Joe, that'll take about 100 steps in order to get there, but at a running pace. And then a kilometer takes you about 10 minutes. So you can see that a mile is 1.5 times longer than the kilometer. That's because a mile equals 1.6 kilometers. Okay? So you have to understand, how do you use these references in order to determine what you're going to measure by. Now, that being said, sometimes you are going to be able to argue two different ones, okay? Like a yard and a meter, those could technically be interchangeable, okay? But so there's sometimes more than one answer. But if you're way off, you also want to think about how the increments are changing. So like for a door frame, what would you use to measure the length of a door frame? Well, if we think about a door frame, if we're talking about it from up here to here, okay, I'll put a little knob here. I would argue you're probably going to want to measure that in meters. So like measure it in meters. But someone could also argue you could measure it in yards. Okay, because meters and yards are quite close. Let's see if there's a conversion over here for us to see that. 1 yard equals 0.9 meters. So yeah, we can see that 1 yard equals 0.9 meters, which is pretty close to each other. So something you can measure in yards, you can probably argue you measure in meters. Now, one thing about this is you could also maybe argue that you're going to measure it in feet. Why would you do that? Now, that's because door frames can differ, like the height, very minimally, right? So you could maybe say feet, but I would probably go with meters or yards here. Now, what unit would you use to measure the width of your computer screen? So like this screen here, and we can imagine that screens can get like this big, okay? They can get incrementally bigger by small units. So I would probably want to measure this in inches, okay? That's because another computer, like if you think about it, there's usually like 12-inch computers, and then you bump a little bit up to like 13.5-inch computers. Even if this was a foot length long, you wouldn't want to use feet, because in order to jump up to a tiny bit of a smaller computer, well, this might be 12 inches, and then you'd have to say, well, the next one's like 12.12 inches, which is, or sorry, feet, which is kind of ugly to listen to, right? So you want to say, well, this is 12 inches, and then the next computer might be 13.5 inches, and then you get to a 15-inch screen. So I'm going to say inches for this one. And what unit would you use to measure the length from Calgary to Edmonton? Okay, well, hopefully in Canada, you would know this one. You would measure it in kilometers. Okay, so kilometers. But again, someone in the States, they're probably, if they were driving from Calgary to Edmonton, they would probably see the sign that says, like, I think it's about 250 kilometers away. They would have no idea what that is. They would open up their calculator or their computer, aka their phone, and they would look up the conversion of 250 kilometers to miles. So If you were someone who lived in the States, you would probably use miles, but us Canadians, we're going to use kilometers. Okay, so in this unit, you really have to understand how to convert between these three things. Okay, that's kind of more 1.3, where we'll actually be converting between all of these. But something you want to be able to do is set up ratios. Okay, ratios are extremely important to know how to use, okay, and know how to properly use them. So in this case, I'm going to teach you how to use I'm going to teach you how to use ratios and then some cross multiplication division. One thing about Math 10C is we do not want to put all of our eggs in cross multiplication and division. This is just for chapter 1, where I'm going to allow cross multiplication and division. Because by the time we get into chapter 3 and on, that's not going to help us very much. It's just going to confuse you more to use it. So for right now, it's going to be cross multiplication and division, but later on, we're not going to use that. So Mr. Skaber is fencing his backyard. His backyard needs 40 yards of fencing lengthwise. Fencing costs $5.90 per foot. How much will Mr. Skaber spend? So in this case, we have a ratio here. We know that for fencing, that costs $5.90 per 1 foot. Okay, so something with questions and in Math 10C, what you want to do is you want to kind of annotate the question. So list everything you have, okay? Make this sentence turn into just a few simple things to read. What we need is 40 yards of fencing. Now, the problem here is we have this awesome ratio that we can set up, but we have this in yards. This is set in feet, this is set in yards. In order to use this ratio, these two units have to be the same. Okay, so how do we deal with that? Well, the way we're going to deal with it is we're going to convert this 40 yards into inches. Okay, so if we go up here, this is converting between imperial units. These are also known as SI units, just for your information. We're going to locate our conversion factor, which is 1 foot equals 12 inches. This can be set up as a ratio, okay? So we know that 1 foot equals 12 inches, okay? So that's our ratio now put into fractional form. And now we can use this. Oh, sorry, we need it in yard. So we're not converting it feet to inches. That's my bad. We're converting yards to feet, which is not super difficult because that's found right here. 1 yard equals 3 feet. So the same thing. I'm going to put 1 yard on top over 3 feet. Now, something to understand is you could decide to put feet on the top and yards on the bottom, and you'll still get the same answer. The most important thing is the same units go on top, same units go on the bottom. Okay, so in this case, we've set up our ratio. We're going to put our equal sign, and we're going to take that 40 yards, and yards are always going to go on the top. So 40 yards, the question mark is how much feet. So I'm going to represent it as X is 40 yards. And now we can cross multiply, divide. So 3 times 4, divide by 1. Cross multiplication works by multiplying the numbers across from each other. Okay, so 3 times 40, and then dividing the odd number out. So this will become 3 times 40 divided by 1, cross multiply, divide the odd number out. And that is 3 times 40 gives me 120, and this is measured in feet. So now we have 120 feet. That's what 40 yards is. So we actually need 120 feet of fencing. So we have this, and we can use this number to figure out how much money that's going to cost Mr. Skaber. So I'm going to put equal sign. It's the same situation. I need to put the same units on the bottom and solve for the top number, which would be the amount of money. So for 120 feet, how much is that going to cost? And this time I'm going to represent this as a question mark. How much is that going to cost us? Again, we're going to perform cross multiplication division again. these two numbers are going to multiply each other and divide the odd number out. So $5.90 times 120 divided by 1. So I'm going to grab my calculator, and we're going to do 5.9 times 120 divided by 1. Oh. And I can plug that into the calculator just as is for now. So 5.9 times 120. And that gives me $708. So he's going to have to cough up a bit of money in order to actually be able to afford this. So yeah, so that's the biggest thing. Figure out what your ratios are and use those ratios to your advantage. So if you need to pause the video or rewind to watch this video or this example again, please do so. But yeah, so let's go on to example 2. So Mr. Scaber wants to space lamps 8 inches apart along his 10-yard driveway. How many lamps must he purchase? So a picture is always useful. Let's say this is our driveway here. Okay, we're driveway and we're putting lamps 8 inches apart. So the circles are going to represent lamps. So from here to here, and that has to be 8 inches apart. How long is this? Well, this is 10 yards. Now, what we need to do is we need to figure out what possible ratio can we use. Well, I already see a ratio here. Remember, read through this. Don't just look at the numbers, actually read what these numbers are tied to. This 8 inches is what the spacing is between our lamps. So for every lamp, we need 8 inches for it. Yeah, 8 inches for one lamp. So now we have a ratio. For every 8 inches, one lamp gets 8 inches, okay? We can set up this ratio. We could put 10 yards on the top here and figure out how many lamps do you get for 10 yards. But the problem is, in order to use this ratio, the top number has to be measured in inches, not in yards. So we're going to have to convert yards to inches and then plug it into our ratio here. So let's do that. First off, how many inches is in 1 yard? Okay, let's figure out what conversion we can use. So we can see here that 1 yard equals 3 feet equals 36 inches. This also means that 1 yard equals 36 inches. 1 yard equals 36 inches. So we can set that up as a ratio there. We know that, so I'm going to convert 10 yards to inches. Okay, we know that 1 yard equals 36 inches. Now we can set this ratio up and solve for our how long 10 yards is in inches. So remember, yards are always going to go on the top. So 10 yards, and that's going to be an X amount of inches. Okay, so how much is 10 yards in inches? Well, we're going to cross multiply, divide here. So 36 times 10 divided by 1. And that will give me 360. And what is this measured in? Well, we're converting it into inches. 360 inches. Now we know that 10 yards equals 336 inches. Now we need to figure out how many lamps do we need to fit there. Well, we know every lamp needs 8 inches. We're dealing with 360 inches. And the question mark is, how many lamps do we need for that amount of space? Again, cross multiply, divide. 1 times 360 divided by 8. And that's going to give me 45. And that's measured in lamps because it's on the bottom. So we're going to have to buy 45 lamps, and that's just to put it along one side of the driveway. Maybe he has a bunch of trees on this side. If we needed it on both sides of the driveway, we'd multiply this number by 2. But the question does not say that. So If any of this was confusing, please come in and ask questions. Take these notes down, highlight the parts that don't make sense, and come ask questions. It's super important to read the question, not just the numbers. What do these numbers represent? Can I set up a ratio? So you should be good now to go on and try the AFL 1.1 found on your Moodle. Please give those questions a shot and see how you do. Thanks. Have a great day.